Hello, my name is Farah Qassimi, and I am speaking to you today from my studio in Bushwick, Brooklyn, in New York City. And I am excited to share my work with you. I'm just going to do a quick kind of rundown of what the last couple of years of my career have looked like. And I wanted to invite you to hopefully use the chat function. If you have questions, I will leave some time at the end to hopefully have a conversation about anything that you might feel compelled to talk about. So I just wanted to start with, I'm going to share my screen. And I will say that talking to Zoom does not get easier, even a year in. So this is just a little slide of all of my interests. So as I mentioned, I live here in New York City, and I am primarily an artist, but I also work as an assistant professor of photography at both Bard College and also at Pratt Institute in the MFA program. I took sort of a roundabout path to becoming an artist, and I was very lucky for a particular set of circumstances that made it possible for me to do what I love as a living. I know some of you may have just seen the presentation by the Sheikh Salama Foundation, and I actually did the amazing fellowship a couple of years ago that enabled me to go to graduate school, and that was really important for my life and my career. So just to talk a little bit about what culture means, it's something that I think about often, and I like to quote the cultural theorist Stuart Hall. He talks about cultural identity as not only a matter of being, but of becoming, belonging as much to the future as it does to the past. And because this is, my work is very much involved in the Emirates and about the Emirates in different ways, I think it is important to continually question the word culture and what it actually means. And for me, it means the things that we surround ourselves with every day, the objects that are embedded in our daily lives, and things that really remind us what our values are and what we hope for ourselves and the people around us. So these images here are really to just show the kind of visual history of the Emirates and its relationship to photography. So this is the work of Ronald Codray and Wilfred Thesiger, who some of you may know, but they're the kind of main creators of our visual archive in the 20th century, who were British explorers in the region and created these seminal bodies of work around the different tribes in the Gulf. And I think about this a lot, particularly because our visual archive is very much formed by outsiders until a certain point. And so I think I like to root my practice in an anti-colonial perspective in the sense that I want to root my gaze in moments that are fleeting and benign, sort of offering the meaning that that culture gives us every day in our daily routines, rather than sort of elevating it to this capital C thing that is maybe inaccessible and is decided by people who are not us. So the work that I do is mostly kind of in informal places, usually takes place in people's homes or in the place that I go to every day, shopping malls, different public spaces for commerce or for leisure. And I'm really thinking a lot about the home as a place where a lot of different dynamics and social situations can unfold. So just to start with, I'm sort of jumping around a little bit in terms of my work, but I do want to talk about my trajectory in relationship to it. I actually went to school to study music. I went to Yale in the US, and I was supported by the presidential scholarship, and I happened upon art by accident. I ended up taking a drawing class and then fell in love with photography later on in my college years. I moved back to the Emirates to work for NYU Abu Dhabi and later the Higher Colleges of Technology. And it was a really incredible time, I think, to be there, because a lot of people were thinking about the future and what the Emirates could look like. And it was really kind of this moment of reckoning with being able to decide and really just be a part of informing something new. So this photograph I think is an important one to point out. This is a photograph of the opening event of the Qasr al-Hisn festival, which is, you know, a big part of our culture. And in Abu Dhabi, the Cultural Foundation and Qasr al-Hisn were really and are pillars of our community, and, you know, one of the most important public spaces to just go and witness culture, whether it was, you know, classical piano concerts or, you know, art shows, or just going to the library to read. So as you can see, there's a lot of information here in the way that I photograph that involves people's personal tastes and aesthetics, but also how that relates to culture and national identity at large. This image, I think, is an important one. This is of a dear friend of mine who's an artist who I actually met through the Sheikh Salama Foundation Fellowship. And some of you might recognize that this DVD box set is of late anime, which a lot of us watched in the late 80s and early 90s, that was translated to Arabic. And then there's a Princess Diana doll over here, and there are different Barbies and sort of like Victorian-esque dolls. And so this for me is important because it really speaks to the bedroom as this sort of, you know, meeting point of all of these different things that inform us, and you know, and who we are and our visual identities. So this is quite a recent picture, but I think again it really comes back to the bedroom and personal private space as a place where all of these things coalesce. I work with installation and video as well. Often the meaning that I try and tease out in the work actually exists in the relationships between images rather than in the images on their own. You know, I think that relatability is important. I think that I like for people to be able to come in and sort of project their own meaning onto these things, but there is definitely an underlying logic that is determined both by my lived experience and also by my research about the places that I visit and the things that I photograph and the people that I photograph as well. So going back to my first body of work, really, when I lived in the Emirates in around 2012, I became very interested in the you know, the sort of visual effects and of the growth that was happening at the time. And I was very much interested in the world islands, which you know, people kept saying were falling into the sea, and it seemed like this sort of metaphor for something, but at the same time there was a lot of growth that was happening. So it just seemed like there had to be a way to sort of witness the complexities of a country that is growing quickly and continually redefining itself. And so I became engaged with the habit of street photography, where after work, at the end of the day or on weekends, I would go to, I would just kind of go for walks with my film camera and my flash and take photographs of these places that hinted at a kind of aspiration or a kind of wish, and really an attempt to sort of transform and transcend reality. So this is a butcher shop in Satwa, and you can see the meat that's in the sink, but then there's also this pastoral landscape that does not quite look like anything in the region. This is at a beauty salon in Abu Dhabi. This is at JBR. They had commissioned a sculptor to make sand castles, and they kind of mirror the architecture of the buildings behind them. This is the Student Administration Council President Hall at the higher colleges where I worked. And then some of these I think have a much more opaque meaning in the sense that they are engaged with a kind of anxiety of surface. I think I was thinking both about this greater existential period of growth and change that the country was witnessing, but also what it meant for individuals who were situating themselves in relationship to this, this larger idea and forward momentum. One of the things that I was doing at the same time, because so much of this is about beautification and surface, was going to photography studios around the Emirates and asking the photographers to make me beautiful with no other instruction or guidance. And so the photographs of me are from that project, and I was wearing whatever I was wearing on the day. So again, I think you can really see the beginnings of my interest in filling a frame with information and really asking the world to tell me about itself through surface and through other images as well. As you can see, my studio is surrounded with images. And so I think that sense of crowding and too muchness and maybe an overwhelming of the senses is really very much at the heart of my work. Over here, you can see I have a little cloud by my feet for some reason. This is one of the first McDonald's franchises in Dubai. This is in the Crown Plaza Hotel on Sheikh Zayed Road. And they had moved the sign for a newer one. And you can sort of see the imprint here of the golden arches. There's me, howdy. This is at a glow-in-the-dark mini golf, I don't know what you would call it, place in the basement of Wafi. This is the Ras Al Khaimah. This is a Gulf oil drum that's been repurposed as a planter pot. This is another dear friend of mine who's camouflaging into her carpet. This is a niqab shop at the Saudi pavilion of Global Village. This is my dear friend in her living room wearing a Biggie shirt. And this was the sort of physical manifestation of that work at the Third Line in 2014. So I was working in the Emirates for quite a while, and I got the opportunity to go to graduate school. So I went back to Yale to get my MFA in photography, and ended up figuring out really what it was that I needed to survive as an artist, and that was community. And it's something that I repeat often to my students or to anybody who asks me what is important to keep in mind about trying to sort of maintain an often difficult and kind of movable lifestyle. I freelance, I do many different things as part of my work, but the thing that always anchors me is my community. So that's my friends, fellow artists, people whose feedback I really value, people whose work and thought process I really value. And I really was able to find that in the residencies that I did, both in the Emirates and in the US and in graduate school. So I was there for 2 years, and then I did a couple of residencies, one at the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture in Maine, and one at the Delphina Foundation in London that was supported by the Georgia Art Foundation and ADMAF. And then I moved back to New York to teach. So since then, I have been here really trying to sort of maintain my relationship with the Emirates in different ways, still continuing to show work and shoot there. But things have shifted a little bit, and I think I'm very much interested in creating a practice that is somewhat removed from geography, or interested in seeking things that maybe surpass geography in a way, and that speak to global issues of national identity and personal cultural identity. A recent project that I did called Umanar was looking closely at the history of jinn possession in the Emirates and the way that it sort of waned a little bit over time, and how different modes of spirituality have replaced others. So I actually met with an exorcist named Ahmed, and he spoke to me about his experiences with, with exorcisms, and I wasn't able to photograph him because these are not things that are widely performed, and they're quite private, understandably. So instead of making a documentary, which I originally intended, I made this fictional character named Umanar after the archaeological site. And she is sort of a jinni who expresses her sadness at the loss of belief in her. And it's this kind of, I call it a horror comedy. It's filmed in the style of a reality TV show, but it's a playful way to really contend with the sort of passing of time from the point of view of a paranormal entity, and how she perceives her own importance and the importance of mysticism and spirituality as pillars of culture, as time goes on. So there were photographs that were loosely related to the video as well, again in this sort of maybe roundabout logic that I'm used to, and you again see the layering of images, and I really think of this almost as a reflection of the outside world that I grew up in. I'm sure if many of you have driven on Sheikh Zayed Road, you can see that there are billboards everywhere there are giant vinyl advertisements on the side of buildings. And so there really is this language of aspirational imagery embedded in the geography and the infrastructure of the country. And so that's something that I try and mirror in my own work by just creating this real layering of images. The wallpaper that you see here, this is a photograph of the haunted palace in Ras Al Khaimah, which is said to be haunted by a colonial ghost, a Portuguese ghost, and her tribe. And then there were various related photographs that are more closely involved with the narration of the film. And so I like this idea that the film could kind of be the glue for the photographs and could invite you to spend time with them and really try and understand how they are connected. One thing that I should mention, because I think I got a question about the technical equipment that I use, is that I don't use Photoshop except to color correct. So all of my images are pulled from real life. I am very interested in doing the most amount of work in the moment of witnessing a moment in the moment of taking the photograph, to really transform that moment and bring it out of reality and heighten it and use the camera to mirror it and amplify it. And so for me, often that means using lighting, or just using composition and really paying attention to color. But I don't, add things into the frame. I don't change things. Some people would call it cheating. I wouldn't necessarily call it cheating. This is at a pet store in Ras Al Khaimah. So a lot of these, I think, have to do with an undercurrent of spirituality and belief. This is what the work looked like installed at the Yokohama Triennial in Yokohama, Japan recently. A much more informal hanging, as you can see, but again, incorporating this layering of both my work and also research imagery taken from around the internet that was advertising exorcism services. Okay, so we're coming to New York now, which is, I think, a nice place to end. So I recently was invited to do a project for the Public Art Fund, which is a New York-based nonprofit that invites people, artists from in and around the city to make work specifically for public space, accessible to everybody. That's something that I very much believe in, and I think that art should be accessible to everybody, as accessible as possible. And so I was very excited when they told me about this project, which involved making a body of work for bus shelters all around the city and all of the boroughs. So I thought about the bus shelter as a space for advertising and how often it's very difficult for a small business to afford advertising in these kinds of spaces. And so I wanted to really use them as an opportunity to almost bring these small businesses into the public sphere and to celebrate how many of them are run by immigrants to New York City, how it really is truly a city of immigrants. And so thinking about my own relationship and my family's own relationship to New York and the sort of history there, I went to many of the places that I already went to take photographs and think about celebrating them and really sort of putting them on this pedestal in a way that people understood that they weren't being sold anything, but instead they were saying, here's another part of the city that's being put on this pedestal for you to witness and appreciate, and that these aspects of our culture are just as important as, say, a Gucci ad or like an ad for a new reality show that's coming out, if not more important. So this is at a mall in Chinatown that reminds me so much of the malls that I grew up going to in the Emirates. And then there's also photographs of figures who are just kind of, facing away or dissipating into the crowd. This image is of a woman at a threading salon in Brighton Beach from Pakistan. A woman checking her eye makeup. This is at a curtain store in my neighborhood, and they have a cockatoo named Coco. And this is a local woman from the neighborhood and her son playing with Coco. And this is it kind of in the wild. So these were on 100 different bus shelters. And it sort of gained this importance that I could not have imagined because they went up right before the pandemic started. And so during the many months of lockdown, this was one of few public art projects that you could go and see safely because everything was closed. This is a bakery store window and a store that was closing in my neighborhood. This is at a store in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, owned by a Palestinian man who has an amazing selection of fashion items and souvenirs as well. And this is also a Palestinian-owned barbershop in Bay Ridge. And so this was actually one of the bus shelters that had this image on it was right next to the barbershop. So it felt like, you know, you saw the image, but then you also could walk past the window and see inside. Okay, so I am just ending on a little bit of my editorial or photojournalistic work. It is very important to my practice to think about truth and fiction and, you know, how photography really sits at the intersection of those two. And there's this Gary Winogrand quote that I often bring up where he claims that every photograph is a lie because you are deciding what to leave out of the frame and you're deciding what to leave in. And so that immediately says that you're editorializing the world. You're saying, this is what you should look at. This is what's important. This is what will tell you the most. And so I constantly think about that as somebody who moves between, you know, a kind of more traditional mode of working that involves responding to things that are happening in front of me and working in a studio, kind of fabricating or building images from the ground up or from research. So this is a project that I did for the New York Times with the writer Liana Akhajanian. And we were invited to drive to do a 2-week road trip from Detroit to New Hampshire and talk to different Americans about their thoughts for the next election. So as you can imagine, it involved speaking to people whose opinions differed from mine. But it was a really interesting exercise in trying to sort of remain impartial. I also want to bring up, because I love quotes, I want to bring up this amazing Susan Sontag quote that I will paraphrase because I don't remember exactly, but she talks about what makes a good photographer, and she says that the best photographers are people who just pay close attention to the world. And that's something that always resonates with me because I have thought often about tools and, you know, and the sort of formal decisions that we can make to really kind of heighten a moment and dramatize it. But I actually think that the work happens with what you look at and the places that you put yourself every day. So this was a project that I did about the first hijabi beauty pageant for American women that happens in Detroit every year. And this is the photographer Mark Jacobs that I got to work with. And this was an illustration that I did for an opinion piece. So that's it. I guess I just wanted to end by maybe sharing a little bit about what I've learned. For me, the power of community is absolutely irreplaceable. I think it's also important to advocate. I've learned how important it is to advocate for yourself when you are a freelancer like me and you kind of, you have different modes of work and income. And it is really important to be your own best advocate and supporter. And I'm really thankful that I've been able to put together, you know, a career that involves so many different modes of working. And, you know, and that also involves being able to share my work and my research with the world. So I'm not sure how much time we have left. I don't think we have much time, but if you have any questions, I'll stop sharing and I'm happy to answer them. Different modes of working and oops. So somebody asked what photography equipment I use, and I will say I use actually a variety of cameras. I use a Pentax medium format digital camera, and I also use a small Sony when I want to be a little bit more secret and quiet. Um, as far as lighting goes, I use minimal lighting. I'll often use just one flash or daylight, but I think the most important thing for me is mobility, really, over everything else. So I don't like to be encumbered or held down by my equipment. So if it means making it work with a tiny camera or even an iPhone, then so be it. And there are some photographs in there that are actually taken with iPhone, I will say. Okay, if there are no questions, then I'm happy to end it here. Thank you so much for tuning in, and it was a pleasure to talk to you. Oh, sorry, I actually did get one more question. How did I discover my style? That's a good question. I think just by continually working and also being a keen consumer of images, aside from just a maker of images, I'm somebody who spends a lot of time on the internet collecting imagery, whether it's Instagram or kind of formal visual archives or libraries. I used to go to the New York Public Library a lot before the pandemic, and just kind of really inundate myself with different kinds of imagery. So I think for me, style is a language, but it's one that can only really be perfected over time and practice. So for me, a big part of that includes looking.